I, just like the majority of you watching the video, love Deltarune. You also probably recognize patterns in Deltarune, specifically with secret bosses. Jebel and Spamton are two secret bosses, both containing shadow crystals and the freedom motif, a holy trinity of sorts for Deltarune bosses. This pattern was continued in Chapter 4 with Gerson. Chapter 3 seems to shatter it. You see, where other chapters have one boss who fit the secret boss, shadow crystal boss, and freedom motif boss quota, not one Chapter 3 boss fits each piece of the puzzle. Instead, there are 3 bosses, each containing one piece of this puzzle. Also note that while Mike is only accessible in Chapter 4, he is going to be counted as a Chapter 3 boss for the purposes of this video. Also, this script was written in December 2025, so I might be missing a lot of new info. Eram, the first boss, is a closely guarded secret. They're only available after obtaining an S rank on the first 2 boards of Chapter 3 and playing the associated minigames. The Knight, the second boss, holds a shadow crystal in their blade for us to obtain. They must be fought to beat Chapter 3, making them about as secret as Tenna. Mike, the third boss, is optional yet easy to find. They give no reward, but hold the freedom motif. They are only available in Chapter 4, despite being Chapter 3 characters. Now, what is the biggest difference between the first, second, and fourth Dark Worlds and the third Dark World? Well, Kris made number 3 right in front of our eyes. This is not a secret. But almost everything about Kris's Dark World is the same as the Knight's Dark World. We learn in Chapter 4 that even slight differences in will among fountain creators can make glaring differences, such as the color palette shift in the second Sanctuary. So, how can Kris and the Knight be so close in will, yet different enough to change such a pivotal detail? Or, rather, what differences exist between their wills, that lie under the surface, rather than being obvious, like Susie's? To answer this, I would like to bring attention to the themes and symbolisms of Knights. Please don't click off, I swear this is relevant. Knights in history were typically named to protect the status quo. They were defenders of the crown, keeping it safe, fighting wars. Basically old-timey military cops on horses. Something was unharmonized, ununified, or something like that. They would stop it. They were unifiers, fighting against forces of chaos. Because of this unity, the forces of shadow, freedom, and secrets were all unified into one common enemy, evil. So the Knight turns them into one entity, silently pulling the strings behind the curtain. However, Kris has a different perspective, something shown in how they see these forces. This could imply a lack of unity in Kris's life. Marriage is commonly referred to as a union, but the Asgorial divorce breaks that union. Asgore is off at college breaking the union of his family, and Kris is alone Matorial. There are 3 different pieces of Kris's life that are broken. Meanwhile, Dess's life was perfectly unified. Noelle was at house, happy as a clam, and Rudy and Carol were, and still are, together. Therefore, the Knight's bosses are in their union while Kris's are not. Of course, there is a more complicated way that the boss trifecta could be broken. One so convoluted that it needs to invent an entirely new Knight theory to be somewhat comprehensible. So, who is Mike in Chapter 3? Mike in Chapter 3 is an invisible entity working somewhere behind the screen until eventually leaving. However, we learn in Chapter 4 that Mike either never existed or hasn't been there for a long time, with a set of 3 Mikes taking over his roles. A character who meant a lot to another character, before disappearing and being replaced by an approximation of their will. Hot dog, that sounds like a parallel to Des and Kris, assuming Des is the Knight. So the Mikes having the freedom motif represent Des's form of freedom. But that doesn't make much sense, does it? If Des is the Knight, she has a lot more freedom than almost any other character. After all, she'd be the one in control, driving the narrative forward. To answer this question, we must return to the idea of unity. So, Knights mean unity. One type of unity represented by the Roaring Knight is the unity of shadow crystals, secret bosses, and the freedom motif. But who's to say they can't be representing another type of unity? They're trying to unite the light and dark worlds, after all. What if we go even further? What if the Knight themselves was a type of unity between Lightners and Darkners? There are holes in Destiny, the biggest one being the voice in the code. The voice in the code is something that is almost certainly Des. The Japanese pronouns from the Spamton scene imply that they're feminine, and Des is the only character who could be there and still make sense. But how would Des being in the code relate to Mike at all? Well, it's simple. Mike is something of Des's. We know that Des liked music. She played the guitar and, presumably, sang. So a character named Mike, as in microphone, suddenly disappeared and damaged their former context would seem to coincide with Des's disappearance. To a point where we can extrapolate and say that with relative confidence, Mike is Des's microphone or something like that. We know from Spamton that a Darkner with a Lightner soul can enter the light world. That was his motivation for killing Kris, getting big enough to reach heaven. Now, this is a massive detail that is somehow never brought up again. And that seems weird, right? I believe this is a Chekhov's gun for Death Knight. Specifically, I think the Knight is a Darkner entity unified with a Lightner soul, Death's soul, while Death's body sits in the code. This shouldn't make sense using Undertale soul logic, as monster souls can't exist without a body, and one's personality is linked to their soul. But this is not Undertale. Monster souls have determination, and one can live as themselves without a soul. We know this because we see Susie making a fountain, something Queen says requires determination. We also see Kris making independent actions without us possessing them, whether that be playing the piano, making chocolate milk, or saving Noelle on an aborted Snowgrave route. While this theory does make some sense, it's also a bit of a wild leap in logic. Somehow, this is a Chapter 3 secret boss video. Crazy, right? Theory also has a lot of holes and jumps around a lot to justify a certain decision. I don't expect anyone to believe in my crazy ramblings, I share them for the love of the game. But anyway, what are your thoughts? Is Podest a possibility, or is it just stupid? Could the broken trinity in Chapter 3 actually mean something, or am I just seeing things through this crystal again? You tell me. Make sure you subscribe for more weird-ass theories in the future like this one. Bye.